that support's going to continue. She's going to support me as a gay woman, just like she's going to support every single American every single day for the rest of her life as President of the United States as well. So, here in Texas, when we welcome someone to our state, we say howdy. We say buenas tardes. We say aloha. We put on our good boots, and we welcome them with yellow roses. So without further ado, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
In Washington who think that they are the ones who make decisions about who wins and loses these elections. It's a reminder about where the power in this democratic republic lies. In the hands of the people. People just like you, who whether through early voting or on election day are turning out to make sure that your voices are heard. This is an important thing that we cannot take for granted. Because, unfortunately, the assumption is in the opposite direction. Who's saying, why are you still here? Why are you still running for president? That's because your voices have not been heard yet. We'd live in a pretty terrible country if we all did. Lockstep, never thinking for ourselves, never being open to new or different ideas, experiences, or perspectives. We recognize that our strength lies in our unity. And that, as the saying goes, a house divided against itself cannot stand. This is the call to action that we are answering with this campaign all across our country. That we choose to lead with a servant's heart. Service to the people of our country. Service to our nation, service to protect the well-being of our planet. And that by treating each other with respect, being open to having the kind of dialogue, conversation, and debate will dictate the leaders, the future, what kind of future we want for our country. And those who we hire, those who we choose to serve our country in political office, their responsibility is not to their party, not to the most expensive lobbyists who are handing out PAC checks like candy. Their responsibility is to we, the people. It's critical in our everyday lives, at work, in our families, in school, whatever it is that we're doing every day. But it is essential in Washington. Because every single day that I go to work there, I tell you, it is so frustrating. Because more often than not, there is a predetermined outcome to any bill that's brought to the House floor, or to anything that goes before most of the committees for debate. And the predetermined outcome is based on which team you're a part of and which team is in power. And there isn't really this honest attempt to better understand, okay, you're putting forward a bill, you obviously think it's a good idea, irregardless of party. Let me better understand why. Maybe I was opposed to it at first, but make your argument, make your pitch. This is what I think you deserve as voters in this country. That this is the way we tackle problems, not blinded by a filter of partisanship, but instead asking the most important question. Here's a bill coming before Congress. Is this going to help the American people, or is it going to hurt them? And that being the context for the decisions that are being made. People will walk down the halls in Congress, they'll pat each other on the back and say, how's your family, how's your kids? But when it comes right down to saying, all right, let's just sit down and talk through an issue and work through it, unfortunately, this is the exception rather than the rule. On President's Day, just recently as we passed it, I was scrolling through Instagram and seeing a bunch of people posting quotes from their favorite presidents. And there was one that I stopped my scrolling on because I'd never seen it before. And it really spoke to this moment about how we do this, because I've had this question a lot in town halls saying, okay, Tulsi, that sounds good, I agree, but how do you do it? How do you actually bridge that divide? What does it look like at a practical level? This quote from Abraham Lincoln said, "I don't like that man. I need to know him better." That's how you do it. That's how you do it. Reach out with what we in Hawaii call aloha, which really just means respect. Reach out with an open heart, with care. Care for each other as brothers and sisters, care for our country, care for our future and those who will come after us. In order to solve the great challenges of our time, we must stand together as Americans, knowing that when we do so, as we have done so before, we can accomplish anything. Anything. This is the United States of America. Thank you. You give me hope. I'm hyped, I'm excited, and I'm ready to go. We got a couple of microphones here. Want to open it up to conversation. If you have a thought or a question or a concern that I can address for you, I look forward to being able to do so. In the interest of time, we want to try to keep it as brief as possible. I'll try to be brief as well, and we'll get to as many people as we can. Yes, sir, we'll start with you.
Well, aloha, Tulsi.
Aloha.
I'm so glad that I managed to get to see you in person.
Thank you.
And
what's your name?
I'm Angelo. I'm all the way from San Antonio. I came here. I drove 3 hours.
Thank you.
About 100 miles just to come and see you because I said, you know what? I don't care about my time during the day. I need to come and see you personally, Tulsi.
I am grateful,
so that's
Angelo.
my
Thank
respect
you
for
very
And then
much.
There's a few things I would like to say because I know the time is kind of brief,
right.
but I would like to thank you for your military service as a major. I give high respects for that. And I also thank you for being against the establishment because the establishment is corrupt, especially the DNC. The DNC is extremely corrupt. Right now, they're kind of prospering the idea that super delegates should take over the votes of the people, which is extremely corrupt because that eliminates the idea of democracy first and foremost. And then I have to thank you for being someone who supports everyone for who they are. And that's a really big respect for a candidate. And not, or .org, I don't know what, but they have 90,300 cases worldwide confirmed with 76 confirmed countries that have the coronavirus now. And now in the United States, we're more than 100 cases with about 11, 12 confirmed cases in San Antonio alone. And I come from San Antonio, and it's a big issue, especially since I live nearby Lackland. So what is your stance on the coronavirus spreading in the United States and across the world, Tulsi? Thank you so
Angelo.
much.
Thank you very much. This is a really, really, really important question for all of the reasons that you just talked about. Look, this ultimately comes down to leadership. And I want to talk about this issue from two different perspectives. Number one is, even as you've stated the numbers of confirmed cases in this country, unfortunately, we've seen a few things that have put our country behind the curve of many other countries who have done far more to protect their people than our country has. We have bureaucracy and red tape getting in the way of preventing the spread of this coronavirus, and the CDC and the FDA, where even they're widening their testing criteria now slightly. But what we've seen over the last several weeks is they had such a narrow standard to where they would allow someone to be tested, and it could only be tested at CDC labs, and it would take days to be able to get the results of that test. That this was the standard, even as the CDC was also telling people that you may be infectious if you have the coronavirus, even with very little to no symptoms at all. So we're stuck as people between a rock and a hard place where we're being told, okay, well, if you're starting to feel a little bit sick, you may or may not test positive for coronavirus, but unless you meet their very narrow criteria, they won't even allow you to get tested in the first place. And then what do you do even if you are able to get tested? Then it takes 4 days before you get the results of that test. Who are you exposed to at that time? If you end up positive, you've already got 4 days of exposure to other people. So this is one example of many where there has been a failure here in the United States that I've been pushing the administration to address. If you're not feeling well, you need to get tested. And those tests can and should be provided with almost instant results. If Scotland and South Korea and many other countries can figure out how to test people through drive-in stations, so you don't have to get out and expose yourself to anybody else, and get those results within minutes, how are we so far behind the curve in the United States of America? We can't figure this out. This comes down to leadership. Whether it's making testing kits available, making sure that we have the resources out there to have information, awareness, basic hygiene training for healthcare workers, first responders, and so forth. We cannot be put in a position where we have to accept what bureaucrats are telling us, that it is inevitable that the coronavirus outbreak will come here, putting at risk the lives of 1 to 5 million Americans. I'm not willing to accept that. And we got to continue to press our leaders to do everything possible to prevent that from happening. Now, one of the things that, this is the second angle I want to focus on here that no one else is focusing on, is I'm going to be heading back to Washington here in a couple of days, where we will be voting on an emergency funding bill to deal with the coronavirus. There's been some, unfortunately, partisan debate around what that number should be. How much money is enough to address the needs of the people? Is it 1 billion, 3 billion, 8 billion? What is the correct number? I want you to think about this. As this bickering is going back and forth in Washington, and we've seen a nickel and diming in the government already saying that they didn't want to test people because they didn't have enough testing kits. The high number that they're talking about is 8 billion. That's 2 months of what we're spending in Afghanistan right now. 2 months. So this puts into context the common refrain that you'll often hear me say, that foreign policy is domestic policy. That you have Democrats and Republicans in Washington hitting the balls back and forth about what this number should be, and nickel and diming the needs, the urgent and pressing needs that people in our country have right now, but nobody really asking the question about, wait, hold on a second. We got $4 billion a month in Afghanistan right now, every month, now as we approach our 20th year of having a presence there. Shouldn't those dollars better be used to actually serve and address the needs, especially as we have this crisis that we're facing here at home? The answer is yes. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Leadership matters. And who you choose to serve as your commander-in-chief will be the difference, will be the change. Because you'll either see someone walking in who lacks that experience and understanding in national security and foreign policy, and therefore then looks to the foreign policy establishment in Washington to say, hey guys, what do I do? What do I do about this situation? Or you can vote for me and have the confidence of knowing that I both bring the experience of having worn these boots for nearly 17 years as a soldier, deploying twice to the Middle East. That personal perspective combined with that focus that I've had in Congress now for over 7 years on foreign policy and national security, bringing this understanding, strength, and foresight that's prepared me to walk in on day one to fulfill that role. Somewhere in the middle here. Yes, sir. Kukui Natle. Aloha. I like your shirt.
Thank you very much. Formerly lived in Hawaii. My dad was at Pearl Harbor, Makalapa. I went to Punahou. Always wanted to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was destined to be in Austin, Texas.
My sons and their mother went to Hawaii for Thanksgiving. Brought me back this T-shirt. Hanauma Bay, that I loved, is now a desert. They went snorkeling. The coral around our world, around our coastlines and everything, is just dying. I thought about retiring to Hawaii, and then Fukushima happened. I don't eat anything out of the Pacific Ocean anymore. I don't know what your acknowledges
I'm
of
vegan,
that. You're vegan, that's right. I read that about you. Yes, you're vegan, right? That's right. That's right. What are we doing? Are we doing anything in the Congress about Japan and Fukushima? And are there any meaningful initiatives about, restoring coral to our coastlines? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I served on the Honolulu City Council when Fukushima, that terrible, terrible accident happened. And that was a major concern about, what is the lifespan of the radiation and the contamination, whether it's on objects, because we were seeing things washing up on our shores, whether they were pieces of wood, construction, or all different sorts of things, as well as a concern about seafood. And testing has been done, and I think those concerns have largely been alleviated. But the concern about the coral reef is something that we're seeing that further degradation all across our islands, especially at a place like Hanauma Bay. And there's a lot of contributing factors to this. This is something they're seeing in Australia with the Great Barrier Reef, and in Florida with a lot of the coral reef there. This is not an issue that's isolated to one area or another. So the way that I would approach these issues is really just, we've got to understand the problem first, and then figure out how we have to solve it. And what we saw in places like Hanauma Bay and in Waikiki, there were hundreds of gallons of sunscreen on the coral reef. Toxic chemicals that were literally just strangling the coral reef and causing them to wither up and die. So there was legislation passed at the state level in Hawaii to ban sunscreens that have these two specific chemical ingredients that were the cause of that serious negative impact. There's legislation that we're working on in Washington that would look to follow that model and example to make sure that coral reefs around the country are protected. In places like Florida, you have the red tides coming in. That's coming from a dramatic overuse of pesticides and that contaminated runoff water that's pouring into the ocean that's having such a detrimental impact on the coral reef and marine life there in Florida. In different communities, you're facing different challenges that are coming often, environmental threats that are coming from problems that we can actually fix at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. And it's important that we make that concerted effort to be able to solve these problems. It can be done. This requires focus and it requires action. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Hi.
So you as a person, all that you've done and all that you stand for reminds me of the reasons that we used to choose leaders, is because you were faithful with a little, and I think we all believe that you would be faithful with a lot. Thank you. And so that is fantastic. I am curious of where you stand on the issue of drugs and legalization of marijuana, and also, very importantly, non-violent drug offenders in jail.
Thank you. It has been decades since the war on drugs was declared, and yet too few leaders admit what a terrible failure it has been, and how it has and continues to turn everyday Americans into criminals, rather than seeing that the answer lies not in throwing people in prisons, but in getting them the help that they need to deal with abuse, substance abuse, and addiction. So the overall approach that I take to the issue of drugs and the war on drugs is to shift our resources and focus away from the criminalization, and instead focus on actually providing that care that people need. There are models. This is not something that has been unproven. We've seen in countries like Portugal, who made some very tough decisions, but who overall created this shift. and over a very short period of time, saw as the numbers of incarcerated people were reduced, the numbers of people in their countries who were struggling with addiction and substance abuse also drastically reduced. Overall, that's the approach that I would take. I have the only bipartisan bill in Congress right now that would very simply, I think it's just a one-page bill, that would very simply end the prohibition of cannabis by the federal government. This is important for so many reasons. I'll list just a few of the top ones. Number one, as I mentioned, we still have people who are in prison today across this country for minor nonviolent marijuana-related charges. That's got to end. Their records need to be expunged. They belong home with their families. Number two, 120 Americans are being lost to the opioid epidemic in this country every single day. We see how in states that have some form of, whether it's medicinal marijuana or full legalization or decriminalization, that there's a direct correlation between a reduction, they have seen a reduction in opioid addiction and opioid-related deaths in those states specifically. And number three, in my brothers and sisters in uniform, people who are coming back with serious cases of post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, chronic pain, chronic injuries, the last thing that they want to do is go to the VA and be told the only option that you have is to take oxycodone or some other highly addictive opioid. But now they have no options. They have no other option. And there are too many of our men and women in uniform who come home who are given that only option and find themselves later addicted to heroin and other drugs, leading to a very, very dark place in their lives. To me, this comes down to a matter of personal choice and freedom. And we're a country that stands on freedom and the ability for us as individuals to make those choices for ourselves and live with the consequences of those choices. This is why we need to pass this bill.
I'd like to thank you for being the only presidential candidate to support decriminalization of sex work, while also acknowledging that everybody has a right to their bodily autonomy and their labor. Have you started working on any legislation for decriminalization of sex work?
I have not. Thank you for your question. No, this is an area that I'm still learning a lot more about. I don't claim to be an expert in this area, but I understand when I was asked at a very basic level exactly what you said, that every one of us has a right to our own autonomy with our own bodies. Thank you. I'll grab someone from the back. Yes, sir.
Hi, Tulsi.
Hi.
My name is Randy.
Thanks for being here, Randy.
Thank you for being here. This is a big day for us here. Our little republic, Texas Independence Day. So it's a good
Happy
day for you
birthday,
to come.
Texas.
I wanted to ask a question. I mean, I really appreciate you for your comment about foreign policy being domestic policy. Yes. I have 3 sons, and the wars that have gone on for so long, it just, 2 of them are teenagers, one's a young adult. It really concerns me. And I think I look at what's happening in the Middle East and just things that don't add up. I mean, I think you've rightly pointed out at one point, how is it that we ended up arming Al-Qaeda in Syria? That doesn't make any sense. But you see the Khashoggi murder happen with no consequences. Erdogan was able to run an op on U.S. soil where his bodyguards beat up Secret Service members and nothing happens.
No consequence.
No consequences. So I know in Washington that there's a circle of, whether it's people in government or people who work in the private sector that, they go through these think tanks, and that there's a lot of foreign money that comes in. And I just wonder to myself, are our foreign policy choices, are they being made for Americans Or are they being made on the basis of this money that's coming in from overseas? And I mean, let's say it's January of 2029. You've had 8 years to deal with the problem. How would you deal with it from a policy perspective?
Thank you for your question. You touch on a lot of really important aspects to this. You've brought up something that not a lot of people talk about, which is the foreign policy think tanks in Washington who are on television. They come and testify before the Foreign Affairs Committee in Congress, the Armed Services Committee. They are presented as experts in their field. I've always advocated for how, just as you have on a NASCAR vehicle, all of the sponsors who paid for that vehicle to exist, have a sign. Put your name, put your think tank, and put all of the people who paid for you to be there. Follow the money. If you got nothing to hide, let's push for that transparency. So for think tank X that gets, $500 million a year from Saudi Arabia, put that out there on your placard so that I know, so that every member of Congress knows, so that you know the words that are coming out of your mouth. Let us be the judge on whose interests you're advocating for. I think it's very telling that, you brought up my legislation, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, and you're asking the question that I've been asking and I've been raising is, how is it that we have leaders across both political parties who either supported or stood by silently as our taxpayer dollars were being used directly and indirectly to provide support to Al-Qaeda and their other affiliated terrorist groups, because they're the most effective fighting force on the ground who are trying to wage this regime change war in Syria. We've seen the same thing happening in Yemen, how the U.S. support of this genocidal war that Saudi Arabia is waging in Yemen includes the use of our weapons being put in the hands, directly into the hands of Al-Qaeda there to fight against the Houthi rebels. This is an outright betrayal. I've spent a lot of time with survivors who lost their loved ones on 9/11, first responders who went in and saved lives and somehow came out alive. Young men who lost their fathers in the attack on that day. And I, like so many Americans, were motivated by those terrorist attacks to enlist, to do what we could to protect and defend our country, and then to see leaders in our own government take our taxpayer dollars and use them to strengthen the very same terrorist group that attacked us on that day goes beyond any word that I can use in this room tonight. I'm serious. And this is not... I'm thinking of you, buddy. This is not just something in the past, though. Here's the problem. And I introduced this legislation, got very few co-sponsors in the House, reached out to senators across the board. The only one who introduced it, Senator Rand Paul. Nobody co-sponsored it. It was Rand Paul and I who stood virtually alone in saying this needs to happen. So fast forward a little bit, Turkey right now. Turkey is a NATO ally, at least on paper, not in actions, but they have invaded northern Syria, and they've declared war against Syria. Russia, who's an ally of Syria, has now sent 2 battleships to the shores of Syria to stand by their ally. Turkey's trying to invoke the NATO alliance's support in this battle against Syria as they have invaded another sovereign country. And Turkey is openly, they're not even trying to hide it, they are openly using Al-Qaeda as their fighting force on the ground to do so. and asking us for weapons and money and support in order to be able to accomplish that. Yes, it is al-Nusra and these other terrorist groups that are essentially Al-Qaeda in Syria. Are you hearing about this on the news? No. This battle is taking place over a city in Idlib in Syria, where if you watch the news, they'll say, well, Turkey is supporting these rebels in their fight for freedom, but not telling the truth that even our own uniformed leaders have said in the last week that Idlib is a magnet for terrorists. And they are inflicting great harm and damage on the civilians who are just trying to survive. They're ignoring what Brett McGurk said. He was the guy who was the head of the fight against ISIS under Obama and Trump, who said Idlib is the headquarters for Al-Qaeda. And yet if you watch news, they'll say, oh my gosh, these poor rebels. This is all just an example to go back to my underlying point that I made about why it is so critical that you have a commander-in-chief who knows what they're doing and who has the courage and the backbone to stand up against that foreign policy establishment that is rooted in cozy relationships and a whole lot of foreign money, to make those decisions that best serve the interests of our nation's security and the American people. This is what I bring to you. That as Commander-in-Chief alone, I can bring about this sea change in foreign policy. This is the authority that the Constitution provides to the President. Congress has the authority to decide whether or not to declare war. The Commander-in-Chief, as Commander-in-Chief, I'll end these regime change wars, these overthrowing of dictators' missions and nation-building missions. I'll work to exercise diplomacy to end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race. We're seeing escalating tensions between the US and Russia and China, other nuclear-armed countries. Iran nuclear deal being torn up and thrown in the trash can. End these wars that are not making us any safer. Make sure that our military is honored by sending them on missions truly worthy of their sacrifice, that truly serve our nation's interests. And redirect our taxpayer dollars. We've spent trillions just since 9/11 alone. Redirect those dollars towards actually investing in serving the needs of our people here at home. Things like healthcare, education, infrastructure, protection of our environment. The needs are great, and we've got to get our priorities straight. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Thank you. So I didn't come as far as some people. I came all the way from like 5 blocks up.
That's awesome.
But you're totally worth it. So my question is along the lines of deported veterans. This month marks 18 years since my father was deported. 2 tours in Vietnam, proud Marine. There's several resolutions that have come before the House that would help bring my father back home. And I'm wondering, are you supporting any of them? Why or why not?
Thank you for your question. I am supporting legislation that's sitting before Congress today that will help to bring our deported veterans back home. It is unconscionable that we as a country would so dishonor those who willingly wore the uniform, who willingly put their lives on the line and took that oath of loyalty to this country, only to kick them to the curb. There are many different circumstances and situations that cause these deportations to occur, but our veterans deserve the right to have the protection of our Constitution and their right for liberty and justice for all. Yes, sir, in the back.
Tulsi, I'd like to thank you for speaking out about the dangerous implications of the Google and Facebook tech monopolies and their effects on free speech. My question is related to this. I was wondering, have you followed, there's been a tremendous amount of pushback and prosecution and difficulty for people who are working in the blockchain space or people who are trying to implement privacy technologies and who are trying to create alternatives to these. There's no clear regulatory framework, and many people who are working in the startup space are being forced to go to other countries or are facing prosecution from the DOJ or the SEC. I was wondering if you have followed that space and what your thoughts are.
Thank you. This is a new frontier, literally, on so many levels. As I have begun to learn more and more about it, I see the great opportunity that blockchain technology can offer. I also see how important it is that as this unregulated space begins to get the attention of those in Congress and in Washington, how critical it is that we have experts who actually understand it, have a seat at the table to help form that regulatory policy to be able to move forward in a way that doesn't undermine and inhibit the opportunity that blockchain has to offer, and to prevent unintended negative consequences that we've seen come about so often when you have people, even with good intentions, in a position of power, trying to do the right thing, but not knowing what exactly they're doing or dealing with. This is essential for us as we look to what is that path forward for the further development of blockchain and its many, many, many applications.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one more question.
Yes, sir, in the back. Your hat on. Yep.
Aloha.
Aloha. What's your name?
Malik.
Malik, thanks for being here.
Thank you. I should say Major Gabbard. Thank you.
Were you in the Army?
I'm in the Air Force, stationed at Lackland Air Force Base.
Awesome. Thank you for your service. Thank you.
I couldn't speed fast enough. That's why I'm in the back. But I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you for not speeding.
Yes. So first, I would like to say I've rarely engaged in a political process, but for once in my lifetime, I found that diamond in the rough, and that is you. And just listening to you since January of last year when you first announced, I have this trust that you will do the right thing, and I don't see that in any other candidate because most candidates just appeal to people's emotions, and you just have that foresight and that judgment. You've been right on many issues, and you will continue to be right. And the media smearing you is one whole other thing, but I totally believe in you. Okay, so my question is, I see presidential candidates that people trust, but then once they get in office, they build a cabinet that is really contrary to what the person stands for. What type of, in the Gabbard administration, and I cannot wait to say that in the future, what type of people would you be bringing to your administration, ma'am?
Thank you, Malik. I get frustrated by the same thing. Be like, wow, man, you just spent a whole year telling us all these things you were going to do. Then you got elected, and you're like, wait, who the hell are you? I don't know who that person is, right? The foremost qualification that I would look for in deciding who to appoint to my cabinet, who I would like to work in the White House, would be a sincere commitment to serve. That I'm not going to take people from Wall Street to come in and serve in the SEC. That I'm not going to take people from Monsanto to come in and run the USDA. And I'm not going to have somebody from defense contractor X, Y, or Z come in and serve as a Secretary of Defense. There's a reason for this. There's a reason for this. Because you deserve to have the trust and the peace of mind to know that people who are in these positions of great power are uncompromising in that commitment and that promise that they make to every single one of us in this country, that their sole focus, their sole purpose is to serve and to act in the best interest of the United States of America and the American people. I would not limit my consideration to only people of my party. I look to inspiration from President Abraham Lincoln, who chose a team of rivals, not sycophants and people who just say yes to everything, but people who bring a different perspective, but who are bound and rooted together around that central, deeply held commitment to putting service above self. I look to people who bring some qualifications to be able to do the job that I'm asking them to do. A small business owner should lead the Small Business Administration, understanding the difficulty and the challenges and the opportunities that we have in increasing and empowering small business owners, entrepreneurs, and innovators. My Secretary of Education will have served as a teacher, bringing that experience in the classroom to making those decisions that will best serve and help our children. That our Secretary of the VA will have worn those boots and that uniform, and who will know and understand those warrior ethos that we leave no one behind. This is the way that I will lead, this is the way that I will serve, and this is how we together will change this culture of leadership away from the pay-to-play corruption, this revolving door between industry and positions where they're supposed to be protecting the consumers, and instead truly bringing about this vision that our founders had for our country, that every American can have the confidence that our government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. For you. Thank you, Malik. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been a tremendous honor to be here with you tonight. Thank you. My heart is full. I love you all, and I'm so grateful for all of your support. The work that we are doing does not end tomorrow. I want to ask you to continue this movement, to continue this work that we are doing, this continued focus on bringing about real change in this country. We cannot afford to stop. We must march on. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Congressman will take pictures. If you come over to this side, Daniel, raise your hand. Line up in front of Daniel, that'll be in, and we'll use the other side as an out. Thank you very much.
right here. Right here.
Oh, there it
right
is.
here.
Okay, thanks.
What's your name? Hi. Hi, Hudson. Thanks for being here tonight. What'd you think? It's good? All right, cool. Glad you're here. I love your shirt. That's an awesome shirt.
One, over here. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Do you want her to sign that?
Yeah, go for it. I want a signature.
You're going to sign the bottom or the top? Bottom this side? Okay.
Got your phone right
Thank
here.
you. Have a good night.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.